Sarah Martinez had always believed that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. At 28, she had built a small but successful catering business from nothing, working 16-hour days to support her elderly mother and younger brother who was studying medicine. Her hands bore the scars of countless kitchen burns, and her back ached from years of lifting heavy equipment, but she wore these marks with quiet pride. The invitation to cater the charity gala at the Royal Opera House had arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Sarah stared at the elegant cream paper with the royal seal, reading the words 3 times before the reality sank in. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of for years, a chance to showcase her talents at one of London's most prestigious venues, with members of the British royal family in attendance. For weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation with an intensity that worried her mother. She researched traditional British cuisine, practiced plating techniques until her fingers moved like a pianist's, and invested every penny she had saved into the finest ingredients. The menu she created was a careful balance of innovation and tradition: herb-crusted lamb with rosemary juice, delicate salmon tartines with dill cream, and her signature dessert, a modern interpretation of trifle that had won awards at local food festivals. The night before the event, Sarah barely slept. She arrived at the Royal Opera House kitchen at 4 in the morning, her van loaded with carefully packed ingredients and equipment. The kitchen was a marvel of efficiency, with gleaming surfaces that reflected the early morning light streaming through tall windows. Other caterers and staff moved about with practiced precision, their uniforms crisp and movements confident. Sarah felt suddenly aware of her second-hand chef's coat and the small hole in her left shoe that she had covered with black tape. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on her work, methodically arranging ingredients and checking her timeline for the 100th time. Everything had to be perfect. As the morning progressed, the kitchen filled with the controlled chaos of professional food preparation. Sarah worked at her assigned station, her movements becoming more confident as familiar rhythms took over. The lamb was seasoned and searing beautifully, the salmon was fresh and pink, and her desserts were setting perfectly in the walk-in refrigerator. At 11 o'clock, disaster struck without warning. Sarah was carrying a tray of her signature salmon tartines when her worn shoe sole, weakened by months of kitchenware, finally gave way. She stumbled forward, and despite her desperate attempt to save them, 24 perfectly crafted appetizers crashed to the floor in a symphony of breaking porcelain and scattered herbs. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners in the opera house above. Every eye turned toward Sarah, who stood frozen among the wreckage, her face burning with humiliation. The head chef, a stern man with silver hair and decades of experience, approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of disappointment that cut deeper than anger would have. "These were to be served to their royal highnesses within the hour." Sarah's throat tightened as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, some sympathetic, others barely concealing their relief that it wasn't them in her position. A few of the more experienced caterers whispered among themselves, and Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. "Should have known better. Not ready for this level." "I can remake them," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have enough ingredients for another batch." The head chef checked his watch and shook his head grimly. "There's no time. The guests begin arriving in 45 minutes, and we still have final plating for the main courses." Sarah knelt to begin cleaning up the mess, her hands shaking as she gathered fragments of her dreams along with the broken china. Other kitchen staff stepped around her, their movements careful and their voices subdued. She could feel their pity like a physical weight, and it was almost worse than their judgment would have been. As she worked, Sarah caught sight of herself in the polished surface of a steel cabinet. Her hair had come loose from its careful bun, her makeup was smudged from the heat of the kitchen, and there was a small cut on her hand from the broken plates. She looked exactly like what she feared she was, a small-town caterer who had reached too far above her station. The worst part wasn't the financial loss, though the cost of the wasted ingredients would set her back months. It wasn't even the professional embarrassment, though she knew word would spread through London's tight-knit catering community. The worst part was the crushing weight of letting down everyone who had believed in her. Her mother, who had sacrificed her own comfort to help Sarah buy equipment. Her brother, who bragged to his university friends about his sister's big break. And most of all, herself. 20 minutes before the first guests were scheduled to arrive, Sarah finished cleaning and stood to wash her hands at the prep sink. Through the kitchen's service windows, she could see staff in the main hall making final adjustments to table settings and floral arrangements. Soon, this space would be filled with some of the most influential people in Britain, including members of the royal family who would never know that their evening had been diminished by her failure. Sarah gathered her remaining dignity and approached the head chef who was coordinating final preparations with military precision. She waited until he finished giving instructions to the serving staff before clearing her throat. "Chef Morrison," she said, using the formal address she had learned during her brief culinary school training years earlier. "I take full responsibility for the incident. I'll pack my equipment and leave quietly." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Martinez, these things happen. Perhaps next time you'll be better prepared." The words "next time" felt hollow, and they both knew it. In an industry where reputation was everything, there might not be a next time at this level. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice, and turned toward her station to begin the humiliating process of packing her things while the gala continued without her contribution. Sarah was halfway through packing her knives when she heard the commotion in the main hall. Raised voices carried through the kitchen doors, followed by the sharp sound of someone dropping what sounded like an entire tray of glassware. The serving staff, who had been moving with practiced calm, suddenly looked panicked, rushing back and forth with urgent whispers. Chef Morrison burst through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with anger and stress. "We have a situation," he announced to the kitchen staff. "The primary catering company for the royal table has had a complete breakdown. Their head chef collapsed, and half their staff has come down with food poisoning from something they ate at lunch." Sarah looked up from her knife roll, her heart stopping. The royal table, the most important service of the entire evening, was without proper catering just 30 minutes before the royal family's arrival. "What about the backup arrangements?" asked one of the sous chefs. "The backup caterer is stuck in traffic due to an accident on the M25. They won't arrive for at least 2 hours, Morrison replied, running his hands through his silver hair. "We need to improvise, and we need to do it now." The kitchen erupted into controlled panic as chefs began redistributing responsibilities and calculating portions. Sarah stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold around her. This was her world, the place where she had always functioned best under pressure. Yet she felt like an outsider looking in. 25 minutes before the royal family's scheduled arrival, Morrison's phone rang. The conversation was brief, and when he hung up, his expression had shifted from stressed to genuinely worried. "That was security," he told his staff. "The Duke and Duchess have arrived early. They're being escorted to the reception area now." Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the kitchen noise. "Chef Morrison, I can help." The entire kitchen turned to look at her. Morrison's eyebrows raised. "Miss Martinez, with all due respect, you've had your own difficulties this evening." "I know," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "But I have everything here for 30 portions of my lamb course. It's already prepped and ready to cook." "The royal party is only 12 people. I can have it plated and ready in 20 minutes. Morrison looked skeptical, but desperation was beginning to show in his eyes. The standards for royal service are exceptionally high. There can be no mistakes, no compromises. I understand, Sarah replied, moving toward her station. But I've been perfecting this dish for 2 years. I can do this. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. As she began working, the months of preparation and years of experience took over. Her movements became fluid and confident, each action precise and purposeful. She seasoned the lamb with the expert touch of someone who had cooked this dish hundreds of times, her hands working from muscle memory rather than conscious thought. The other kitchen staff, initially skeptical, began to take notice. Sarah's technique was flawless, her knife work clean and efficient, her timing perfect, her plating artistic yet practical. One of the sous chefs, a stern woman named Margaret who rarely showed approval, paused to watch Sarah work. "That's beautiful knife work," Margaret said quietly, and Sarah felt a small spark of confidence return. As Sarah worked, something remarkable happened in the kitchen around her. The other staff, seeing her focus and skill, began to rally around the effort. The pastry chef offered his assistance with garnishes. The sauce station helped coordinate timing. Even Morrison, despite his earlier reservations, found himself drawn to watch Sarah's technique. 12 minutes before service time, Sarah had 6 portions plated with a precision that would have made any fine dining restaurant proud. The lamb was perfectly pink, the vegetables were vibrant and precisely cut, and the sauce had the glossy finish that came from perfect technique and quality ingredients. Morrison tasted a small portion from the test plate, his expression serious. Sarah held her breath, knowing that everything depended on this moment. After what felt like an eternity, Morrison nodded slowly. "This is exceptional work, Miss Martinez. We'll send it up." The next few minutes passed in a blur as the serving staff carefully transported the dishes to the royal dining room. Sarah remained in the kitchen, her heart pounding as she waited for feedback. She had gone from disaster to potential triumph in less than an hour, but she knew that the real test would come from the royal table itself. 10 minutes later, one of the senior waiters returned to the kitchen with an unprecedented request. "The Duke has asked to speak with the chef who prepared the lamb course," he announced. "He specifically requested to meet them personally." The kitchen fell silent. In decades of royal service, Morrison had never heard of such a request. Royal protocol typically kept the kitchen staff completely separate from the guests, especially the royal family. This was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Sarah's face flushed again, but this time it was with anxiety rather than shame. "Did he say why?" she asked. The waiter shook his head. "Only that he wished to speak with the chef personally. He's waiting in the small reception room adjacent to the kitchen." Morrison looked at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and concern. "This is highly unusual," he said. "Are you prepared for this?" Sarah looked down at her stained chef's coat and her patched shoe, suddenly aware again of how she must appear. But something had changed in her over the past hour. The confidence she had felt while cooking remained with her, a steady flame that had survived the earlier disaster. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." As Sarah walked toward the reception room, she passed through the main dining hall where the gala was now in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed guests, and the sound of refined conversation and gentle laughter filled the air. At the head table, she caught a glimpse of the Duke and Duchess, both impeccably dressed and radiating the easy confidence that came with a lifetime of public appearances. The reception room was smaller and more intimate, with rich wood paneling and comfortable chairs arranged around a small table. When Sarah entered, she was surprised to find not just the Duke waiting for her, but also a tall man in the distinctive red uniform and bearskin hat of the Queen's Guard, standing at attention near the door. The Duke, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, stood when she entered. "You must be the chef responsible for that remarkable lamb course," he said, extending his hand with a warmth that immediately put Sarah at ease. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah said, accepting his handshake while trying to remember the protocol she had hastily researched weeks earlier. "Please sit," the Duke said, gesturing to a chair. "I wanted to speak with you because that dish was truly exceptional. The technique, the flavor combination, the presentation. It was restaurant quality of the highest order." Sarah felt her cheeks warm with pride, but before she could respond, the Duke continued. "I understand there was some difficulty earlier this evening?" Sarah's face flushed once again as she realized that word of her earlier mishap had somehow reached the Duke. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond without making the situation worse. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," she said quietly. "I had an accident with some appetizers earlier. I'm afraid it was quite embarrassing." The Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I see. And yet, when the situation became critical and we needed someone to step up, you were the one who volunteered to help." Sarah nodded, still not sure where this conversation was leading. It seemed like the right thing to do. What the Duke said next completely surprised her. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that I asked to meet with you not just because of your excellent cooking, but because of something else entirely." He paused, glancing toward the Royal Guard who remained motionless at the door. "You see, Sergeant Williams here witnessed your entire evening." Sarah looked up in confusion, finally taking a closer look at the guardsman. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His expression remained professionally neutral, but there was something in his gaze that suggested intelligence and compassion. "I don't understand," Sarah said. The Duke stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London street below. "Sergeant Williams is part of our security detail, but he's also something of an observer of human nature. He was positioned where he could see into the kitchen during your difficulties, and he shared something with me that I found remarkable." The Duke turned back to face Sarah. "He told me that after your accident, while you were cleaning up and clearly devastated, several kitchen staff made rather unkind comments. Comments about your background, your equipment, your worthiness to be here." Sarah's heart sank. She had been so focused on her own humiliation that she hadn't realized others were actively discussing her failure. "What Sergeant Williams also observed," the Duke continued, "was how you handled yourself. Despite your obvious embarrassment, despite the whispered criticisms, you helped other staff when they needed assistance. You offered encouragement to a young server who dropped a tray. You shared your backup ingredients with another caterer who had run short." Sarah barely remembered these small actions. They had been automatic responses, the way she had always tried to treat others in her own kitchen. The sergeant spoke for the first time, his voice clear and respectful. "Your Royal Highness, if I may?" The Duke nodded, and the sergeant continued. "Miss Martinez, what I witnessed was character. Grace under pressure. The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but how they respond to them and how they treat others when they're at their lowest point." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. The Duke returned to his chair. "Miss Martinez, I have a proposition for you. The royal family occasionally hosts private dinners and intimate gatherings. We're always looking for talented chefs who understand that excellence isn't just about technical skill, but about character and resilience." Sarah's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I'd like to offer you the opportunity to cater a private dinner for 12 guests next month," the Duke continued. "It would include several members of the royal family, and if it goes well, it could lead to regular engagements." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. Just hours ago, she had been packing her equipment in shame, convinced that her reputation in London's catering world was finished. Now she was being offered an opportunity that most chefs could only dream of. I don't know what to say," she managed. Sergeant Williams stepped forward slightly. "If I may suggest, Your Royal Highness, Miss Martinez might benefit from knowing that this offer isn't charity. The lamb course tonight was genuinely exceptional. I've had the privilege of attending many royal dining events, and this ranks among the best dishes I've ever witnessed being served." The Duke nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. This is about recognizing talent and character, not sympathy." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Your Royal Highness, I'm deeply honored by your offer. Yes, I would very much like the opportunity to cook for you." The Duke smiled broadly. "Excellent. My private secretary will contact you next week with the details." He stood, signaling that their meeting was coming to an end. "Before you go, I want you to understand something important. Tonight you experienced both failure and triumph in the span of a few hours. The failure taught you humility, and the triumph showed your true capabilities. Both experiences are valuable, but what happened in between, your resilience, your willingness to help others, your decision to step up when needed, that's what impressed us most." As Sarah stood to leave, Sergeant Williams spoke once more. "Miss Martinez, in my years of service, I've observed that true strength isn't the absence of falling down. It's the ability to get back up and keep moving forward. You demonstrated that tonight." Sarah shook hands with both men, her mind still reeling from the evening's events. As she walked back through the kitchen, the staff looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to newfound respect. Chef Morrison approached her as she gathered her belongings. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said, his stern demeanor softened by genuine admiration. "That was remarkable work tonight, especially under pressure." "Thank you, Chef Morrison," Sarah replied, "for giving me the chance to prove myself." He nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Martinez, if you ever need a reference or recommendations for staff when you expand your business, please don't hesitate to contact me. What you showed tonight, that's the kind of character this industry needs more of." As Sarah loaded her van outside the Royal Opera House, she reflected on the evening's incredible journey. The same hands that had dropped the appetizers had created a dish that impressed the royal family. The same feet that had stumbled in worn shoes had carried her through a moment of triumph. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Better than I ever imagined. I'll tell you everything when I get home." As she drove through London's streets, Sarah realized that this evening had taught her something profound about herself. She was stronger than she had known, more resilient than she had believed, and more capable than she had dared to imagine. The shame that had burned her cheeks hours earlier had been transformed into a quiet pride that settled deep in her bones. The intervention of the British Royal Guard hadn't been dramatic or obvious. Sergeant Williams hadn't rescued her from a physical danger or public humiliation. Instead, his quiet observation and testimony had rescued something far more valuable: her belief in herself and her future in the culinary world. 3 weeks later, when Sarah received the formal invitation to cater the private royal dinner, she framed it next to her first business license. But more importantly, she had learned that true success wasn't measured by the absence of failure, but by the courage to continue in the face of it. Her face no longer flushed with shame when she remembered that evening, but with the warm glow of a lesson learned and a dream reborn.